Hey everybody, this is Repeater On, and today we're doing another Killing Floor 2 tier list. This one is going to be talking about all of the off-perk weapons. So this will be taking into consideration every weapon in Killing Floor 2 that's available for you to buy. So no knives, no grenades, but everything else we're going to be taking a look at and how good it is as an off-perk weapon. So this is assuming you're buying it with any class. How good would it be overall for the classes? And I thought this would be a really fun one to make, so let's get started. And up first, we actually have a really solid off-perk weapon, which is C4. So C4 you don't get very many of. I'm also not going to be going into all the stats of all the weapons. See the other tier list for that if you want to get a full comprehension of what every weapon its stats are. But C4 only weighs 3. So, well, I guess speaking about stats, C4 only weighs 3, so it weighs very little. It does a really high amount of damage. You only get 3 of them, assuming you're taking this as an off-perk, which can be a bit of an issue. But with only 3 weight, that fits into a lot of loadouts, and doing a ton of damage pretty much instantly is really strong. And as an off-perk weapon, this one is going to go right up into S tier, because almost every class can make use of this to some extent, so it's going to go up there. Alright, next we got the grenade pistol. The grenade pistol is also another pretty solid off-perk weapon because you can't hurt yourself with it. It does really high damage with each shot. It weighs 4, which isn't bad. And if you wish to upgrade it, it actually does scale quite well too. Upgrading it causes kind of issues with what you can take with other perks. But even so, it's still a pretty good weapon overall. It's lightweight enough to where you can use it. It's definitely way more situational than the C4 is, where C4 will pretty much always be useful. This one won't be, but I'm going to probably put it into B tier. It's a solid enough option. You could take it as an off-perk weapon with pretty much any class, and you can potentially pick this up off the ground, assuming your demo dies. So that might be a way of you actually getting it. So weapons that you might be able to find on the ground a bit easier will probably score a little bit higher on this list too. So we got the 1858 next, a single one. The single 1858 is actually really good for an off-perk weapon because it only weighs 2, does 50 damage, shoots and reloads relatively fast. It's overall a pretty decent weapon if you want to take it as a sidearm. It's really good to just find on the ground and pick up and use. It's also extremely cheap to buy ammo for. So I think I'm going to put this one maybe into A tier. It's a pretty decent off-perk weapon if you want something extremely cheap. Because you can find it on the ground, or you can just buy it for like $100 or $100, and that's almost nothing. So it's not a bad weapon to take actually early on with other classes if you want to save up for a more powerful weapon later on. Alright, single 500. Single 500 is also a really good off-perk weapon. This thing does 160 damage a shot, and it only weighs 3. It does only have 5 shots, but it's still extremely powerful and a very good off-perk weapon if you want something powerful. I have taken the 500 multiple times with all sorts of different classes and never been disappointed with it. So that's going to go up into S tier. I don't think it's as high as C4, but it's still up into S tier. Alright, up next we got the Deagle. One Deagle is also really good. 2 weight for doing 90 damage is crazy. 7 shots with a fairly quick reload isn't bad. And this is another weapon that fits really well with only being 2 weight. I could definitely see you buying this because it's extremely cheap. It's only $5.50. So that one's probably also going into S tier. Alright, so now we're getting to like some of the bizarre stuff. All these other weapons have actually been pretty good to take as off-perk weapons. Let's talk about a weapon that's not that great. That's the AA-12. Now, the AA-12 itself is a really powerful gun. It's one of my favorite guns in the game, and it's a lot of people's favorite gun in the game. But for 10 weight, for a full auto shotgun, that's a big investment, and not a whole lot of classes can really use that. I'm not going to put it into D tier because just with its raw damage, it is so good. And I think I'm going to put it at the high end of C tier. Like, if you really love the AA-12 and you just want to take it with everything, you can still kind of get away with it because it is just good enough by itself, but not the best. So let's talk about the Battle Axe. The Battle Axe is in a similar spot to the AA-12. Weighing 10 is just insane. Also, buying a tier 5 weapon is just insane for all of your money. It does hit like a truck, and you can block and parry with it, which is true. But it does heavily limit you on what you can take. This is probably also going to go into C tier because there is some people that might really want it just because of how hard it hits. But overall, it's not usually worth taking. All right, AR-15. Now, the AR-15 is a pretty good weapon to just find on the ground because it usually comes with a lot of ammo, and it will one-shot, headshot any of the small enemies. You can also get away with body-shotting enemies pretty quickly with it. Now, it doesn't have particularly great stats. It doesn't have great scale. Well, it does actually have pretty good scaling for an assault rifle, but it doesn't have great scaling overall compared to all weapons. It's a decent weapon to pick up off the ground and use. It only weighs 4, so it's in a similar spot to the grenade pistol. I think I'm going to put it a little bit above the grenade pistol, though, as an off-perk weapon, because you are much more likely to find it laying around on the ground. So it's pretty good when you do find it like that. Probably not a weapon you'd go out of your way to buy, though. So, all right, the blunderbuss. The blunderbuss is also kind of similar to the AA-12. It weighs less, and there is arguably more and less situations you can use it in. It's better for blowing up large crowds, and the shotgun mode is really powerful by itself. So you can kind of get away with using it. It weighs, I believe, 8, which is all right. And it's probably going above the AA-12 in terms of an off-perk weapon. You might use it, maybe. All right, the Kanken Burn. Now, the Kanken Burn is an amazing weapon on Firebug. Unfortunately, it's a pretty terrible weapon on everybody else, though. So you don't really want to take this weapon off-perk because, yes, you can kill things with it. Yes, it does kill small things, especially like crawlers, really fast. But it doesn't have nearly the synergies with any other perk that it does with Firebug. So it's a pretty bad weapon to pick up. It's got bad ammo pickup. You can't just find it laying around on the map, assuming your Firebug didn't die and you picked it up off the ground that way. That'd be really the only case that you'd be using the Kanken Burn, or maybe your survivalist died having it and you picked it up. That's another situation. For those two, like, if you do find it, you will maybe use it for the first round, but you're likely going to sell it. You're probably not going to keep it because it just doesn't help you that much if you're not playing Firebug. So, and as an off-perk weapon, I think this one's going to go to D tier. It's just not that great without all of the synergies that Firebug gives it. All right, Crossbow. Now, the Crossbow is actually really good as an off-perk weapon. It does really high damage. It's extremely ammo efficient because you can pick up your ammo. It has a very high chance to stun pretty much any enemy, and it's actually at 6 weight, which makes it okay to take and not worry about upgrades. It does scale well with upgrades, but it doesn't need them at all, and it's a pretty decent weapon to find, or I guess find on the ground if your sharpshooter died, but also a pretty decent weapon to buy for a lot of classes early on, if you want something that's heavy hitting. So I think I'm going to put the Crossbow into A tier. It's a pretty good weapon. Krovol. Krovol is also a pretty good off-perk weapon because it's very likely that you will find this on the ground. You have the ability to parry and block with it, which is huge. If all else fails, it is better than your knife. So if you run completely out of bullets, you do have a better option than your knife. So for that, I think I'm going to put this one into lower A tier as well. Like mostly just because you can block and parry with it, which is huge on like later waves. If there's Skrakes or Flesh Pounds that are running at you, you can actually survive a lot longer thanks to this weapon. And like at 4 weight, it's still pretty reasonable to take. You're not going to throw upgrades into it at all, but it's not a bad weapon to pick up off the ground. All right, Double Barrel. Double Barrel is also one of the best off-perk weapons. Being very lightweight and doing a lot of damage really helps it. It really gets by just by its own merits as the Double Barrel. It doesn't really need perks to work well. It already has high base damage. And it's not a crazy idea to take this with other classes early on, especially classes that don't have good tier 2 weapons. Or especially if you're very used to using the Double Barrel with like support. It's not a bad weapon to grab early on with like Berserker or SWAT or Commando. I've used them on all of those. It never really fails. It's just really strong. Obviously, you're not going to be building up that class quickly if you're using other perks weapons. But as an overall strong weapon, it is very strong, and it's going to go into S tier. All right, the dual 1858s. Now, you're likely not going to grab dual 1858s. If you're going to get just one, that's fine because it's extremely cheap. 2 is also very cheap. It's as cheap as any of the other starting weapons. You do have a higher rate of fire, but it does way more at 4. So it doesn't make nearly as good of a secondary option. That being said, if you do find 2 of them on the ground, you're definitely going to use them. Because why wouldn't you? So for 2 of them, I'm going to put them into, I guess, B tier. Because it's not really great to buy them. Well, actually, I think I'm going to put these into low A tier. You're more likely to just buy the single 1858, but if you buy one and find another, or if you find both laying on the ground, then they're pretty good. They're pretty good off-perk weapons because they will deal enough damage to kill most small and medium things without any perks or any class requirements or anything like that. So I think low A tier is where they go. Dual 500s. Dual 500s are actually also really good to take off perk. They weigh 6, so they're on that cusp of not the best, because once you start getting to a certain weight, it makes it difficult to actually load in what you want. But that being said, 6 weight does fit into a lot of really powerful weapons loadouts. Anything that weighs 9, you can take it with. I've taken these multiple times with demo, going with an RPG in these, and that's pretty devastating, actually. I've taken them a lot with medic. I've taken them with quite a few classes that really benefit from like that 6 weight. So I think I'm going to also put these into low S tier. You're more likely to buy a single 500, but you probably won't be disappointed by buying 2 500s as off-perk weapons too. So that's there. Let's also talk about the dual Desert Eagles. Dual Desert Eagles are also really good. You're less likely to buy these, I would say, than like the 500s, because you're buying the 500s just for raw power. The Deagles don't do as much damage per shot as the 500s do. They can do more damage per second, but that's usually not what you want. If you want damage per second, you're probably going to go with a on-perk weapon. So I think these are going to be lower, but they're not really a bad option. I'm going to put them into A tier. If you wanted to take both, you could. It only weighs 4, so you do have a lot of options, and it's still not like an awful off-perk weapon. 1911s. 1911s, 2 of them as off-perk weapons. They're kind of like buying the 1858s, but more expensive. You do get more shots with them, and you can fire them a bit faster. They also reload a little bit faster, I believe, too. But it's more of an investment, and you probably aren't going to buy them. You might buy 1, but probably not 2. So I think I'm going to put 2 into B tier, because they still sit at a decent weight. They still sit at 4, so you can use them with a lot of other loadouts. It's not a big deal. But that's where I'm going to put them for now. All right, these are the Winter Bites, I believe. Dual Winter Bites as an off-perk weapon are actually pretty good, because freezing enemies is really good for the team. Anything that provides extra utility for the team is going to score higher than something that doesn't. I believe these weigh 4 as well, so also a pretty good choice, and they are very cheap. Again, you might just want to go for 1 of these, but I could see somebody going with 2 just to have the freezing effect proc more often. So I think I'm going to put these also into low A tier. Pretty decent. All right, Eviscerator. Eviscerator off perk is kind of a hard sale. It weighs a lot. You can block and parry with this, and it does have a pretty good, pretty high block and parry resist. You can shoot the blades off, which will still do a lot of damage. They can still bounce. You can still get your ammo back, but it's a heavy weight investment, and you're probably not going to do it. Overall, this is probably like another C tier weapon. It's similar to like the Battle Axe, where there might be a few situations where it's a little bit justified, but it's almost never going to be fully justified, like taking any of these lightweight weapons up through here. All right, Fire Axe. Fire Axe is a harder hitting Krovol, but that's usually not what you're going to get the Krovol for. You're going to get the Krovol for blocking, and for that, it has the same block and parry multiplier as the Krovol, I believe. So you're getting a little bit slower, heavier hitting weapon that weighs more. That's not a good option for an off-perk weapon. That being said, you can still block and parry with it, so it goes to C tier. All right, the Flamethrower. This might be one of the Firebug weapons that I a little bit recommend as an off-perk weapon. Weighing 7 is heavy. It limits you on what you can take. However, the Flamethrower by itself is really good at killing trash. At killing anything small, it's probably one of the best weapons in the game for that. Ammo pickup rate is going to be absolutely awful for this, though, and it's going to take extra fuel to kill things because you're not going to be using this with Firebug. Overall, this still is an okay-ish weapon. It's not worth throwing upgrades into whatsoever, but I'm going to put this up high into C tier, where it does have some uses, but not a whole ton. You don't want to be buying this all the time with all your classes. All right, Frostfang. Now, the Frostfang is pretty similar to the Winter Bites in that you can freeze things with it. You can also melee with it. You can also block and parry with it, which gives you a lot of options with this. But it does weigh 7. 7 is, again, a hard sale because 7 is where you can't always take everything with every class. It's also more expensive than the Winter Bites if you want to take it as an off-perk weapon. And arguably, it's not as useful as the Winter Bites in most situations as an off-perk weapon. As an on-perk weapon for support and Berserker, it's extremely good. But as an off-perk weapon, it's probably B tier. It's still decent, but not as great. Alright, Glock 18 with the Riot Shield. This weighs 9, I believe? It's 8 or 9, I can't remember exactly. Full auto handgun with a shield, so you can block with it, but only when you ADS. If you want a weapon to block with, it's probably better just to find a Krovol laying on the ground or buy one. It's going to be cheaper. And for a fast shooting gun, you can also do better for the price and for the weight. So this weapon is probably C tier. Like, the shield is a little bit redeeming for it, but that's about it. All right, a single Glock 18 from Gunslinger. Now, this one is probably better than the regular Glock because it is fast firing and you can kill little things with it. That being said, you could just buy a submachine gun instead. It would probably be cheaper, it'd probably be better, and it would weigh about the same. So this weapon still is not that great as an off-perk weapon, but it's in C tier. It's okay. Dual Glocks are lower in C tier because they weigh more. Yes, they have a really high rate of fire. They have a pretty big magazine. You can kill little stuff with it pretty quickly, but it weighs so much that there's no real reason for you to take it. So it's C tier. All right, Medic Pistol. As an off-perk weapon, Medic Pistol is going right up into the top of S tier because it weighs 1 and you can heal your allies with it. It has so much utility for no weight that it pretty much just goes to the top because it is probably the best off-perk weapon in the entire game. In almost every situation, unless maybe it's C4 or a 500. Those are about the other two options I could think where you might not want to take a medic pistol because maybe you only have 3 weight to spare instead of 4. If you have 4 weight, then you can take it and the 500 or it and the C4. All right, Medic SMG. Medic SMG also is one of the better off-perk weapons. You can heal your allies with it. You can kill trash with it. It only weighs 3, which is great. If you want an extremely lightweight gun that you can heal people with and kill small things with, this is the gun for you. And it is going right up into the high end of S tier as well. All right, Medic Shotgun. Another fairly lightweight gun, weighing 6. Well, I should say lightweight for a shotgun. Weighing 6, being able to heal, and also being a shotgun, so it actually does pretty high damage, and this one's pretty accurate as well. This is another pretty good weapon to take if you want to take it. And I don't see why it wouldn't also be somewhere into A tier. Pretty decent weapon overall as an off-perk weapon. Medic AR is a little bit less of a sale because it goes up to that 7 weight. 7 weight's much harder to load into your, put into your loadout. That being said, it is still a medic weapon. You can still heal people with it, and it still does kill small things. I would say that the Medic SMG is pretty much always going to be better for you if you want to take an off-perk weapon. It's cheaper. It's just, it weighs less, and it does a not as good job, but pretty decent job at just killing small things. So this is probably also going to go into B tier. Has some uses, but probably not the best. All right, the Arc Generator. This thing weighs 9, which is very limiting on what you can carry. That being said, the Arc Generator does do double damage towards bosses, so it does have that going for it. And it doesn't really get any bonuses from any sort of perk anyway. So if you have that extra 9 weight, it's probably not a bad idea to try this weapon out. I've used it on Medic before and had no issues with it whatsoever. You could use it probably on Berserker as well and get away with it without too much issue. I'm going to put this one probably into the high end of B tier, somewhere over here, I guess. It's an okay option, but it's another one of those very situational weapons. All right, this is the Heal Thrower. This one, I believe it weighs, is it 8? 7 or 8? You can heal your allies with it. It actually is pretty cheap. It's only 1,000. You can heal your allies. You can poison Zeds. That's all pretty useful. If you can spare the weight, it's not a bad option. I wouldn't say it's one of the best medic weapons to take, but it is still a medic weapon, so it does have that going for it. And I'm probably going to put this one into low B tier. I could see a couple classes taking this and being able to heal your allies. All right, this is the Insurgent. The Insurgent weighs 8, I believe. You do have the Railgun-like shot. It has the EMP effect. You can also use it as a heal with its potentially infinite healing darts. This one is probably less likely to be taken out of the medic weapons because it is a bit more clunky. And if you want a high damage weapon, you're probably just going to go with like the Railgun or the RPG as an off-perk weapon, or C4 because it's just it fits in so well. Even so, I think I'm still going to put this towards the high end of C tier. It's similar to like the Flamethrower and the Blunderbuss. Certain situations it excels at, others not so much. This is the Kaboom Stick. Kaboom Stick is pretty much just like the double barrel. It comes in at 1 more weight, but it does actually does more than double the damage of a regular double barrel per shot. You also can't blow yourself up with it, and you don't need to throw upgrades into this. Plus, it gives you the extra mobility like the regular double barrel does. So it's probably going to go right up into the high end of S tier as well. I don't see any class having any issue just picking up the Doomstick and using it too. Especially if like your demo dies and you pick it up and use it. Maybe your demo left or something. Alright, this is the Hrg Nail Gun. Now, the Nail Gun on SWAT is really good. On everybody else, not so much. It still weighs a good amount. It does okay damage, and it does pretty good. It has a pretty good rate of fire. You can also bounce nails off of things, but for its weight, it's usually not worth it. And if you want a submachine gun, the medic submachine gun is a better option. So into C tier it goes. All right, the Scorcher. The Scorcher as an off-perk weapon is pretty bad. It does only weigh 4, but even so, like, floor fires don't help you a whole lot with any other class besides Firebug. And shooting it directly at things is generally not as good as just using, like, the grenade pistol. If you want something that's high damaging like that. That being said, it still has some use. Since it only weighs 4, you can use it with a couple other perks. So I guess it's still probably D tier, I would say. It's usually not a weapon worth taking outside of Firebug, just because nobody else really scales with fire. All right, dual Buckshots. These weigh 4. They do 160 damage, I believe, if you hit with all pellets. They can fire pretty quickly. They can kill small stuff pretty well. They can kill medium stuff decently well. If you don't intend on upgrading them at all, they're not bad, but they're not, they're again not really ideal. So I'm probably going to put this somewhere into like the middle of C tier. It's okay as an off-perk weapon, but the single Buckshot is actually way better. 160 damage for only 2 weight and costing only 550 is great. This is very similar. Well, I mean, it's based off the 500 Magnum. It's the HRG version of the 500 Magnum. So early on, it's actually really, really powerful. I would still say the 500 is generally better than it because that's 160 damage just in a single shot, which will help out more classes, and you can shoot it at longer ranges to more effect. But this is still probably like high A tier. It's still a pretty good off-perk weapon if you wanted to take it. All right, the Tesla Launcher. The Tesla Launcher is also not a bad off-perk weapon because you do have status effects with it. It can be shot with the EMP grenades and cause the EMP status on most enemies. It does weigh quite a bit, and it is a big cost investment. Also, its main rate of fire, its main fire isn't as useful in most classes, but it's still not bad. So I think this one's also probably going to go somewhere into the middle of B tier. All right, up next we have the Vampire. And the Vampire, I have to admit, I've never taken as an off-perk weapon. I would expect that it would do all right because it does pretty decent damage. You do have the ability to heal teammates with it. And you can shoot the spikes out, which do a pretty good amount of damage. It does weigh quite a bit, and I think it's similar to like the Insurgent, where you're probably not going to take it because it does cost quite a bit, but you can still heal with it, so it does have some merits to it. Dragon's Breath is okay as an off-perk weapon. It does weigh an okay amount. 6 shots with a pump action kind of sucks. It has a slow reload, but the fire can help. You can rack up a lot of assists with it. It's really good at killing stalkers and crawlers. It's probably not going to be a gun that you go out and buy though, but it does have some uses. So I think low end of B tier. I think it has a little bit more use than some of these other guns, but it's still not like ideal. So there we go. Ion Thruster. This is gonna go right into C tier. It's the same story with like these. It does do a lot of damage. Ion Thruster does have a really cool ability to knock everything back, but it weighs a lot. You can parry with it, which is a good pro to it. But usually if you're going to get a melee weapon as an off-perk weapon, you just want it to be lightweight so that you can use it to block with. And that's about it. And then assuming if you run out of all your ammo, you have something else to use besides just your knife. All right, the AK. The AK as an off-perk weapon is also all right. It is kind of a big investment for the money. It does okay-ish damage on other classes. It does have a fast rate of fire with its burst fire. It's all around just kind of an okay gun, but at a decent weight of 6. So, I'm probably going to put it into C tier as well. It's all right. All right, the Katana. Now, the Katana is actually a pretty decent off-perk weapon because it doesn't weigh a whole lot. It's faster swinging and easier to use than your knife because it has longer reach, and its light attacks are actually pretty fast even without perks affecting it whatsoever. You can also stab with it, which gives you a pretty decent reach, and you can block and parry with it. This weapon I would usually take over the Krovol, assuming I didn't find the Krovol on the ground. So somewhere into A tier, it's a pretty decent off-perk weapon if you want something purely to block and parry with, and if you completely run out of bullets with your other weapons, you have a sword to slash stuff with. M14. M14 as an off-perk weapon is also alright. It sits at an okay weight. It does pretty high damage per shot. It's pretty accurate. The ACOG scope is kind of nice on it. Overall, as an off-perk weapon, I would probably put this somewhere in the middle of B tier. It's an okay weapon. Alright, 1911. 1911 is better than 1911s, but it's still a similar situation of you probably won't buy it because the 1858 exists and it's just cheaper, and you just want a really cheap gun early on. It's not a bad weapon, and I think I'd probably put it into A tier, just because it's lightweight and does decent damage. Alright, the M38, M39, I can't remember what this one's called exactly. The rotating grenade launcher, the revolver type one. This weighs 9. You do get grenades with it, which can kill small things very easily. They can kill flesh bounds pretty easy. This thing has a awful reload speed, though. It is bad. It takes forever to reload this thing, and it's probably not worth taking as an off-perk weapon. It's also extremely expensive. So this is going to go to the bottom of C tier. I mean, you can blow some stuff up with it, and it's pretty cool at that, but then you got to take like the 15 seconds to reload the dumb thing, and in that time, you could definitely die from something. All right, the M4 shotgun. The M4 shotgun on support is really good. On every other class, not so much. It weighs a bit too much to be useful. It still does good damage and good damage per second, has a decent spread. Overall, it's a pretty decent weapon, but nothing great. I think I'm also going to probably put this into low B tier. I think it has a little bit more merits than some of the others, but not always a weapon you would take for every situation. All right, the single grenade launcher. This is probably way more useful than the rotating grenade launcher. You can use it with other perks. It doesn't weigh as much. It can blow up like flesh pounds and other things pretty easily. That being said, you're still probably not going to take it over something like C4 or even the grenade pistol for that matter, or especially like the Kaboom Stick. But I think I'm still going to put it into like B tier. Some situations, not so bad. Others, not so great. All right, the Hemo Clobber. Now, this is pretty much what I would definitely take if I wanted a melee weapon off perk, because this gives you the ability to heal. It also blocks and parries pretty well, and its healing cloud works to you and your allies, as well as poisoning all Zeds, so you can easily hit something if you got surrounded, hit something big, and shoot them with whatever your primary weapon is. It also only weighs 4, which is amazing, and this one's probably also going to go up into S tier. It is a really good off-perk weapon, probably up there, I would say. Very, very good weapon if you wanted to take it off perk. Microwave gun. Microwave gun off perk is okay. Mostly what you're going to be using it for is its secondary fire, because the secondary fire pushes enemies back. So you're going to be using it to support the team. That being said, though, the microwave gun weighs 9, so it's a very expensive investment to support the team for. It does have that going for it. Its primary fire does microwave damage, which is good against certain Zeds, but you don't get any bonuses like you do with Firebug. So this is probably going to go like low B tier as well. Certain situations, not a ton of them though. All right, the Mine Reconstructor. Mine Reconstructor is also kind of heavy. It does heal. You can lay out trip mines, which can heal you, heal your teammates, and hurt all the Zeds that walk into it. So it's not bad for that. Still at its weight, it's not the most ideal weapon to be using for as a medic weapon. So it's probably also going to go into low B tier. All right, Minigun. As an off-perk weapon, the Minigun is not the best. Like 10 weight, yeah, you do have a really high rate of fire. Yes, you do have okay damage. And it actually does do bonus damage against bosses. That being said, it's almost never worth the weight. It's almost never worth the price. And it's severely going to limit you on what you can actually use. I think I'm going to put the minigun probably into D tier. It's a pretty bad weapon to take off perk. It's not a great weapon to take on perk for Commando. It's really only a good weapon for like Survivalists. Survivalists can make the best use out of it. I guess you could take it with support too, and it would have some use to it because you'd have extra weight. But it would almost never be like a good option compared to what your other options could be for other perks. All right, Mosin. Now the Mosin weighs, I believe, 7. It does really high damage. It has one of the longest, I think it's actually the longest reach out of any melee weapon with its stab. It does high stab damage, and it doesn't cost that much. The Mosin's actually a pretty good off-perk weapon to take if you want a high damage accurate weapon. So it's probably going to go into the higher end of B tier because on certain really long maps, it might not be a crazy idea to take it as an off-perk weapon. Most like any enclosed maps though, it's not going to be like a good option. All right, Pulverizer. Pulverizer hits really hard and you can block with it, which is pretty good, and I think it gets C tier because of that. It still weighs a decent amount, so you're probably not going to take it if you just want a weapon to block and parry with, but it does add a little bit more than other weapons, and it isn't so heavy that it's kind of ridiculous. Railgun. Railgun's also not an awful off-perk weapon because it does really high damage per shot. You will be reloading really slow. It does take up a lot of weight, but that being said, it still hits pretty hard. So I think it's also going to go somewhere into B tier. I could see people taking it maybe. All right, Dual Rhinos. Dual Rhinos are also okay as off-perk weapons. They do enough damage to make them relevant. They don't cost as much. They're probably not going to be your main option, though. I would definitely take like Desert Eagles as an off-perk weapon over these. So I think they're probably going to go into lowish B tier. Not the best. A single Rhino, though, is probably going to go a bit higher. It's probably going to go into A tier, because just buying one isn't that much of an investment. It does still do pretty good damage. It makes for a decent sidearm if you would like to take it as a sidearm, you know, unupgraded. It's okay. All right, the Bullpup. Let's see, what does the Bullpup have going for it? Not a whole lot. Bullpup weighs 6, which isn't bad as an off-perk weapon, but it does the same damage as almost all the other assault rifles and brings nothing else to the table. This is not a good weapon to take off-perk. If you want to kill small stuff, once again, the medic submachine gun exists, and you're probably going to take that over this. Because then you also get a weapon that weighs half as much with more bullets, and that's just better at killing small things. So you're going to D tier as well. Bullpup, where you belong. All right, the Scar. The Scar is pretty much the same as like the AK. It's an okay weapon to take off perk. It doesn't weigh that much. You can still use other things with it. It's not going to be like one that I would really recommend at all. You can still get better weapons if you want high damage or if you want high rate of fire. So Scar is going to go also into C tier. Seal Squeal. Seal Squeal is super fun. It's also very devastating to anything that you hit, but it does weigh a lot, and you don't get very many shots with it, and you can blow yourself up with it. So I think C tier is where it kind of goes. Super fun weapon, one of my absolute favorite weapons in the game, but probably not a good on-perk or off-perk weapon. It's a pretty good on-perk weapon, but not a good off-perk weapon. All right, the pump shotgun that support starts out with. Well, you do have the advantage of potentially finding this on the ground. It does do pretty high damage per shot. It doesn't weigh a whole lot. Yeah, it doesn't reload that quick. You're not going to upgrade it, but as a weapon that you just find off the ground, it's not bad. It's probably towards the high end of B tier. All right, Tommy Gun. Tommy Gun has much more of a reason to exist than others as an off-perk weapon, because it does have a big capacity magazine and you can shoot it fairly fast. That being said, it still weighs a lot, so it's going to be somewhere into C tier like most of the assault rifles get. Generally, if you want a high capacity, high rate of fire gun, it's better to go with the most lightweight submachine gun that you can get. So it doesn't really make sense to buy an assault rifle in that context. All right, the nail gun. Nail gun's actually pretty good. It shoots pretty fast. You don't get a whole lot of shots with it, but it can do a lot of damage per second. And you can ricochet nails. It's also one of the most cost-effective weapons in the game. Doesn't cost that much. And I think we're going to put the nail gun as an off-perk weapon actually into A tier. Low A tier, but into A tier because lightweight and high DPS as well as high damage per shot. Freeze Thrower. Freeze Thrower is also another pretty good off-perk weapon because you can freeze things with it. Now, it does weigh a lot. It's probably not worth getting over like the dual winter bites or a single winter bite. But it's still not a terrible option, and it's probably going somewhere in the middle of B tier because it does have that status effect. The UMP-45 has, I believe, the highest damage per shot out of the submachine guns. It's pretty easy to control. It doesn't weigh that much, and it's not a bad submachine gun option if you were going to take it. So I think it's going to go into probably low B tier. It's okay. Bone Breaker, Bone Crusher. I don't remember what this one's called. The shield and the mace. This one's also not a bad off-perk weapon because you can block almost anything with this, and blocking gives you the most damage reduction. So if you're really concerned that you don't want to get hit at all and you just want to turtle up, this isn't a bad option as a melee weapon. It still weighs a good amount, but I think I'm going to put it into low B tier as an off-perk weapon. It does have some use. Wow, our list is getting full, but we're almost to the end. All right, the compound bow. There's almost no situation I can really think of to where I would buy the compound bow as an off-perk weapon. It does have the ability to frost things, but it costs so much, and it's just like... So if you just want freezing, go with the freeze thrower, go with the winter bites. They're just better. Yes, you can pick up your arrows, but it's probably going into C tier. Limited use. Spitfires. Spitfires as an off-perk weapon are still really good at killing small things. They are also very cheap, so I don't think they're going to get D tier. You can also be fairly accurate with them and cause quite a bit of fire on the ground, which kills a lot of small stuff. You're still probably not going to buy 2 of them, so they're probably going to go to low C tier, but there is some use for them. All right, the Hemo Goblin. Hemo Goblin's pretty good. You get a heal with it. You get to apply status effects to enemies. It does weigh a good amount, though, and it doesn't hold the most shots, but it does have some things going for it that make it a somewhat tempting off-perk weapon, and I think I'm going to put it into low A tier. Let's see. This is the Incineratory Rifle. The Incineratory Rifle outside of Firebug is pretty bad. It's like a lot of Firebug's weapons. Outside of Firebug, it's really not that great. It still doesn't weigh that much. You get the fire grenade, which is kind of cool, and it does okay damage towards small things. Once again, it's like most of the other assault rifles, though. You're not going to bother taking them while you have submachine gun options as an off-perk weapon if you want to do that. So it's probably also just going to go somewhere into C tier. HZ-12. HZ-12 actually isn't that bad. It only weighs 5, so it can actually fit into quite a bit of loadouts. It does decent damage per shot. It holds a huge magazine. It's pretty cheap, so I think it goes to B tier. All right, Vector as an off-perk weapon. This is the fastest rate of fire submachine gun in the game, and that's about it. It doesn't do that much damage per shot. You do get a lot of damage per second, relatively to it. It's not hard to control, but it does cost quite a bit. You're probably not going to take this because it weighs a good amount and it costs a good amount. You're going to go for a cheaper SMG. So into C tier it goes. M16. M16, I would say, has more uses than most of these other assault rifles because you do get the grenade launcher. And I would say that this is also better than the single grenade launcher because, yes, this does cost more, but it's effectively a better weapon. Capable of killing large things, small things, and crowds pretty well. So the M16 as an off-perk weapon is probably going to go to the top of B tier, in my opinion. MP5. MP5 would be good if the medic submachine gun did not exist, but the medic submachine gun does exist, and you're always going to take that over this weapon as an off-perk weapon because it's just better to heal than to have a slightly higher damage and a little bit better rate of fire. So C tier. MP7. MP7 is better than MP5 because you can find it on the ground. It's also cheaper just to buy if you wanted to do that. So it's probably going into high B tier as well. It's better than the AR-15, I would say, to use as an off-perk weapon. Even though they're the same weight, being full auto is just a little bit nicer. So P90. P90 is actually a decent submachine gun off-perk because it holds a lot of rounds and it doesn't weigh very much. For those two things alone, it's going up into B tier. That's a general theme with a lot of the weapons. If they don't weigh very much and they do at least one thing good or one thing acceptable, they're going to be okay to take. All right, Seeker 6. Seeker 6, probably, I don't know if you would ever take this as an off-perk weapon, really. The main reason why you would take this in general with demo is like you want to trigger Destroyer of Worlds and get a whole bunch of nukes, or you just want to clear a bunch of small things or stack up potential damage on one big thing, depending on how accurate you are. Off perk, it really doesn't give you that much. It's not that high damaging for a demo weapon. It still does pretty high damage because it is a demo weapon, but not as high damaging. It weighs a lot. It's expensive. Probably D tier as an off perk weapon. You're probably not going to take it with anybody. This is a single Spitfire. Single Spitfire is better than double because you can do essentially everything that it can. Not quite as well, but it does weigh less, which is a bigger pro to me. And it's probably going into B tier. Centerfire. Centerfire as an off-perk weapon is actually really, really strong. 6 weight for doing 165 damage is really good. or 5 weight. 5 weight for doing 165 damage is really good. That's just as powerful as the, or it's actually slightly more powerful than a 500 Magnum. You get more rounds for it. It does way more though. So I wouldn't put it as high as I put like the 500 Magnum, but I would put it up into A tier. It's a pretty good off-perk weapon if you wanted to take something just powerful. Stoner. Stoner is super fun, but it's in the same boat as like the minigun. You're probably never going to take it. It weighs too much, and all its job is to do, like off-perk, is just to kill a bunch of small stuff. Buy the Medic SMG and forget about the rest of these guns like this. Winchester. Winchester is probably also going to go up into high end of A tier because it also weighs 5. It does 80 damage a shot, and you can find it laying on the ground. So that's great. It makes as a really good off-perk weapon whenever you find it, even if you find it into later rounds. Single Winter Bite. Once again, freezing is good. Being lightweight is good. So I think you go up higher into A tier. Pretty solid option if you wanted to take it. It's also very cheap if you wanted to buy it. Zweihander. Zweihander weighs quite a bit. It's probably in the same boat as a lot of these other melee weapons. You can block with it, you can parry with it. It does high damage with its heavy attack, but if you want something to block and parry with, there's better options. Go with the Hemo Clobber or go with the Krovol, assuming you find that on the ground. Or maybe go with like the Bone Crusher. Alright, the Killer Watt. The Killer Watt can apply the EMP effect. It does weigh a lot though, and it costs a lot. You're probably not going to be taking this as an off-perk weapon, but it does provide some utility to it, so I guess it just gets C tier because of that. Helios Rifle. Off-perk, you're probably never going to take this. It does okay damage. It does pretty good. It has a pretty good rate of fire. It weighs a good amount though, and it costs a lot. It's like most of Firebug's weapons where they just don't do well on other classes, where they might be amazing on Firebug, but they're pretty like subpar. So I guess C tier. It does still do a decent amount of damage, so I'll put it a little bit higher than D tier. The RPG. RPG is the highest damaging weapon per shot out of any weapon in the game, I believe, except for kind of like the Kaboom Stick can actually hit harder. So the RPG does weigh a lot, but it is a very devastating weapon, which might be the reason why you take this off perk. And it's not bad as an off perk weapon, really. This is probably going to go higher up into A tier, despite it being so heavy. Let's see. Then we've got the 2011. 2011 is, I guess, kind of like the 1911, but way more expensive, and you're going to be using it for the same job, so I don't really see the point of buying it as an off-perk weapon. Probably somewhere into C tier. Dual 1911's even lower, or dual 2011's even lower. Like, you're even less likely to buy dual 2011's. Because if you want a handgun, you're either gonna want you pretty much just want something powerful or something that gives you utility. Either like the single winter bite, single buckshot, single 1858, single Desert Eagle, single 500, something like that. FAL does more damage than a lot of the other assault rifles. It is more of a cost, but it is a bit better for that. I would still probably rank it like C tier though, mostly because if you want a gun that's like this, you can go with the M14, which is a better off-perk weapon, I would say, which is kind of strange because I would argue the opposite way on perk. I would say for like sharpshooter, the FAL is better than the M14 because it gives you the full auto capacity, which is great. But off perk, something that's cheaper is just probably going to be better for you if you want that. Husk Cannon. Husk Cannon is another off-perk weapon that you're probably not going to see. It weighs a lot. It takes time to charge. You can burn yourself with it, kind of. If you want a heavy damaging weapon, it's probably better to go with the RPG. And it's really not worth taking off-perk on anybody, really. I think it still is, like, probably C tier because it does do high damage, but that's about it. The M99 does devastating damage, but it weighs a ton and it costs a ton. I have seen people buy this on Boss Wave, and it's sort of worked out. I don't know why they didn't switch over to like Survivalist to use it, but I have seen people do it. With its damage alone, I think it goes up to C tier instead of D tier, but it's still not really a good off-perk weapon. 3 weight with anybody besides like Survivalist and support is pretty crippling for almost everybody. Maybe SWAT and Medic. Well, SWAT and Medic can get away with it because you do have the Medic SMG. I've seen some people use it with Gunslinger too, and you can kind of get away with that, but that's, I think, mostly just because you're playing Gunslinger. You can get away with just about anything. You know, take it like a Medic pistol and then like a single Desert Eagle, and they'll still do fine. So it does have some options. I've also taken it with a Firebug and used a single Spitfire, and that actually worked out okay. So maybe I would actually move this up into low B tier. Like, just for its devastating damage alone. That's about the only real reason. Alright, MAC-10. MAC-10 is actually a pretty good Firebug weapon. And it's a pretty good SWAT weapon because it is very lightweight. It doesn't cost a whole lot, and it does decent damage as well as damage over time. I think it's probably still like C tier. I don't think it's as good as these two weapons, but it's high up into C tier. Maybe at the top of C tier, actually. Medic Grenade Rifle. This one is pretty similar to the other Medic Rifle that I put into B tier. It does weigh 1 more, but you also get Medic Grenades. Medic Grenades are better, and they can provide a lot of utility for the team. Being 8 still kind of sucks, though, so it's not getting any higher than B tier. Alright, the MKB 42, I believe. This weapon is pretty bad as an off-perk weapon. It does have pretty high base damage, but it has a slow rate of fire for that. It does weigh quite a bit at 7. It's not the best assault rifle to be taking, and it's probably also going to go into D tier as an off-perk weapon. Just not one that I'd really recommend. Doomstick. Doomstick weighs a lot. It weighs 10, does really high damage, does give you bonus mobility, but it weighs a lot, and it's C tier. Very hard to use. Road Redeemer is exactly the same as the Katana, so it's going to go up into A tier right next to the Katana for the same reasons. Because mostly you're just going to be using it to block and defend, and it's arguably better than the Krovol for that because you do get a little bit more damage. Obviously, the Krovol you could argue is better though too because you can find it off the ground. So the last weapon we have here is the Static Strikers. Static Strikers weigh a good amount. You can apply the EMP effect. You can block and parry with them. They're still not like a weapon I would really recommend though. But I guess I'd put them into B tier just because you can apply the EMP effect, which does give them a little bit of utility over some of the other melee weapons. Alright, so this is every weapon in Killing Floor 2 ranked based on how good they would be as an off-perk weapon, assuming you're not taking them with the class that they're intended to be taken with. And the weapons that generally score the highest here have a lot of utility and are generally very lightweight. You can see that definitely in the S tier. The medic weapons heal you and don't weigh that much. Shotguns are just very strong. A tier, very similar. I wouldn't really be surprised seeing any class running any of the S tier weapons as off-perk weapons, or most of the A tier weapons, to be honest. Once you go down, though, to like B tier, it starts getting way more situational where you might take it, but probably won't. C tier is where it's like, you might see them pop up every once in a while, and they won't be awful, but they won't be anywhere near ideal. And then D tier is pretty much, you're never going to see these taken as off-perk weapons. Well, you might see the Kanken Burn quite a bit, but that's just because your Firebug might have died or tossed it on the ground or something. So this is where I would rank all of the Killing Floor 2 weapons as off-perk weapons. Tell me what you thought of this list. It was a lot of fun to make this list. And tell me if you'd like to see any other type of videos in the future, whatever they might be. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for all the support. If you guys would like to support the channel even more, you can go over to my Patreon, where for just $1 a month, you can support it there and get early access to some of my videos that I put up there about a day or two early. You can also go over to my merch store, buy any of the Reapy Run merch available over there, and use promo code Reapy. That way you get 10% off your total order. We have pretty much every kind of clothing you could want. Pants, leggings, socks, shirts, anything that you'd like, even pet hoodies, because they were available. So check that out. Links are down in the description. And thank you guys for coming and watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye.